I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
All right, so I'm back for part 4 of the series on Being There by Jerzy Kosinski. Being There is a fable. It's by a Polish author, but it's about American democracy. And it has a timeless message that may be particularly timely right now. And we're in a part of the book now where things start to get really interesting because Chauncey Gardiner, who used to be Chance the Gardener, is about to meet the president of the United States of America. And all of this happens because his garden got shut down where he had lived his entire life. He stumbled out onto the street, got hit by the right person, you might say, in a limo owned by a very wealthy man, Mr. Benjamin Rand, and his wife, E. And he's been in their home. And because he's so well-dressed, as he recuperates, he's so well-dressed and so handsome. And because he really doesn't have anything going on in his head most of the time, he appears to be extremely suave and self-confident as well. So he's attractive. E is attracted to him. And Mr. Rand is about to die. He's old. He's got some sort of illness. But he is the chairman of the board of the First Financial Institute, the Financial Institute, which, you know, the names that Kosinski gives things are very, very simple and direct. And I think it creates that fable-like feeling. So this chapter starts out with Chauncey getting a call from Mr. Rand, who basically says, well, Mrs. Rand, is had to fly to Denver, so she's not around. And he would normally go to the big meeting of the Financial Institute to give an address about the American economy, but he's not going to be able to do that. But the president is coming to this meeting, and since Mr. Rand can't be there, he's going to pay Mr. Rand a visit. So anyway, Mr. Rand basically says, Chauncey, I'd really like you to meet the president of the United States. Okay, so now most of us would be like, oh my God, what did I get into? How did I get here? But because Chauncey has lived really with very little contact with human beings and just a lot of television, everything is just kind of fluid for him. He feels like he's in a TV show, so he just goes along with it. It seems normal because that's what's happening right now. And so he gets searched. He gets, you know, sort of like to make sure that he's not dangerous. The Secret Service come. And then pretty soon, the president is there and Chance gets called down, right? And the makeup person has made up Mr. Rand to look a little bit healthier. But there are several references in this book to the fact that Chauncey doesn't need any help at all. He's gorgeous, apparently, and his suits fit him perfectly. So he comes into the room, they sit down, and they have this seemingly high-level conversation where the president is asking Mr. Rand about his take on the economy. And it comes out that the American economy is doing pretty bad. There's a lot of inflation. People are angry. It sounds like there's people that are out of work. Businesses are not doing too well. You know, the blankety blank is hitting the fan with the American economy. And the president's going to the Financial Institute meeting to speak to a lot of very important people and to make a statement about the economy. And he's coming to this, the chairman of the board, this old man who he needs to pay respect to, but also to get his, take on things. And they talk, and most of the time Chance doesn't understand what they're even saying, but he sits there very politely. He's nodding. When he first comes into the room, the president shakes his hand and he says he knows that he's supposed to look directly into his eyes because that's what the president does when he is talking to people on TV. So he gives him a handshake, and I'm sure that makes a huge positive impression of how suave and how like practiced he is supposedly at meeting VIPs. And he feels extremely comfortable, it seems, and he really is, because whatever's happening is what's normal at the moment for Chauncey. So he listens, he doesn't really understand, but then at a certain point, the president of the United States asks him, well, do you agree with what's been said here? Like, what's your take on how well the economy is doing? And Chance's first reaction is, wow, he's not sure what to say. However, he searches around for whatever he does know, and he says this: in a garden, growth has its season. There are spring and summer, but there's also fall and winter, and then spring and summer again. As long as the roots are not severed, all is well, and all will be well. And then he says, he raised his eyes. Rand looked at him, nodding. The president seemed quite pleased. I must admit, Mr. Gardiner, the president said, that what you've just said is one of the most refreshing and optimistic statements I've heard in a very, very long time. He rose and stood erect with his back to the fireplace. Many of us forget that nature and society are one. Yes, though we have tried to cut ourselves off from nature, we are still a part of it. Like nature, our economic system remains, in the long run, stable and rational, and that's why we must not fear to be at its mercy. We welcome the inevitable seasons of nature, yet we are upset by the seasons of our economy. How foolish of us. He smiled at Chance, and he says, I envy Mr. Gardiner his good, solid sense. That is just what we lack on Capitol Hill. Okay, so I mean, this is just great. All right. Like, now, would this really happen? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I find it imaginable. But, there's a reference here to what we now would recognize as kind of like capitalist realism, right? That, this economic system, Chauncey supposedly is saying, is just like nature, and it fixes itself and it works itself out. And, the president is sort of reading between the lines in a very, very serious way here. And of course, Chance has no idea what he's talking about, actually. But, the president reads, well, we may be in a recession now, but recessions are sometimes necessary for kind of clearing out the dead wood and for, destroying what needs to be destroyed. And, then the economy will be healthy again. So we just need to kind of bear with it. So the president then, he's pleased, and eventually he leaves to go on his way to the meeting. And then we find out that he gives a speech in which he directly uses Chance's language. Okay, so the president going to the Financial Institute, which is being televised to, I think it said up to about 40 million Americans are watching this, okay? Back when everybody watched these big events on networks, all right? And the president says, well, I'll back up and say what Kosinski writes first. In his speech, the president reassured the public that no drastic governmental measures were forthcoming, even though there had been another sudden decline in productivity. Quote, there was a time for spring, he said, and a time for summer. But unfortunately, as in a garden of the earth, there is also a time for the inevitable chill and storm of autumn and winter. End quote. The president stressed that as long as the seeds of industry remained firmly embedded in the life of the country, the economy was certain to flourish again. So we see a couple of things going on here. We see Both, Kosinski's critique of television and, mediated information, and the fact that people can be so like superficial and impressionistic that they can look at Mr. Gardner and listen to his simplistic words and think that he's making a profound statement, primarily because he just looks and acts and he's associated with people with a lot of money and power. Okay. And so, he's got to be making some sense. And so then people read into that. And this is a big danger of mediated information generally, right? And especially visually mediated. So the fact that he's excellent looking is like a big deal. So this chance visit turns out to be extremely productive for Chauncey, okay? Because it shoots him into the stratosphere of fame. He's shot into the stratosphere of fame overnight, basically in this one instance, okay? And, pretty soon he's getting media requests. And again, his demeanor, because he doesn't know anything, and, but he has like stock phrases that he can use, keep him from getting into trouble. Like, he's called by a reporter from the New York Times, right? Who's tried to do some research on him, but can't figure out who he is. And so, basically Chance gives him very matter-of-fact answers. The reporter says, do you wish to comment basically on the possibility that you might join the board of First American Financial Corporation, which I guess Mr. Rand previously had said maybe Chauncey would make a good addition to the board. And Chance says, no, not now. And then the reporter says, since the New York Times is covering the president's speech and his visit to New York, would you care to comment on the nature of the discussion that took place between you, Mr. Rand, and the president? And Chance says, I enjoyed it very much. And he continues to give these, very curt answers, which is taken by the reporter to mean, oh, he's being, he's being cagey, or, he doesn't want to give away too much because he's that important, right? So, no, it's because he doesn't know anything at all. He's just doing the very best he can, trying to fit into this, basically this scene that he thinks he's playing. All right. He gets another call and he actually goes on television. All right. So in this case, he's going on an evening television show, kind of like what would have been back then, maybe like the Johnny Carson show or something like that. One of these late night shows. Okay. And he's asked the same sort of question, and he gets prompted. The guy who's interviewing him says something like, well, the president talked about the economy being like a garden. I mean, do you agree with that? And Chance says, I know the garden very well. I have worked in it all my life. It's a good garden and a healthy one. Its trees are healthy, and so are its shrubs and flowers, as long as they are trimmed and watered in the right seasons. The garden needs a lot of care. I do agree with the president. Everything in it will grow strong in due course, and there is still plenty of room in it for new trees and new flowers of all kinds. And he gets kind of mixed reviews, but then he goes on. Some people are booing, some people are clapping. He says, in the garden, things grow, but first they must wither. Trees have to lose their leaves in order to put forth new leaves and grow thick and stronger over time, thicker and stronger and taller. Some trees die, but fresh saplings replace them. Gardens need a lot of care, but if you love your garden, you won't mind working in it and waiting. Then in the proper season, you will surely see it flourish. All right. So, of course, he's still just talking about a garden, but also I think Kosinski is using this to express the kind of almost inhuman view of the economy that we often see, in the press and in decision makers who think of it as it's kind of like a machine that needs to be managed and tinkered and oiled and so forth. And If, some people have to lose their livelihoods, or some people have to lose their business, or, property gets destroyed due to competition, making it obsolete and so forth. That's all just kind of the price that you have to pay, kind of like tilling up the soil and or letting things die and then planting again in the spring. But that dehumanizes the economy. The economy is made up of people who are all just trying to survive and live a good life. And they are really the ones that are getting tilled up and been destroyed, oftentimes feels like very prematurely. But this is taken by the audience and by especially the person who's interviewing him as very optimistic, and he comes across as a businessman who knows what the heck he's talking about. And so his seeming optimism catches on, right? And then most of the audience turns to loving this guy. And when he goes off the set, the producer is saying, "Oh my God, you did a great job. Great job. They loved you." He goes back and he meets briefly with old Mr. Rand, who's very weak indeed, and who suggests that, he's, well, first of all, that he's just amazing, that he's done an excellent job. He's strong and he's brave, he's direct. So he says a lot of nice things about him. And then he tells him that his wife is chairman of the Hospitality Committee of the United Nations. And there's about ready to be a reception at the UN. And of course, Mr. Rand can't go. So he asks if Chauncey would escort her there. And Chauncey says, of course, because that's his next role. Yeah, he's just along for the ride. And Mr. Rand looks at him very meaningfully and basically says, if anything should happen to me, please do take care of her. She needs somebody like you very much. I mean, it's as clear as day that even though these people have only known this Chance, what little they know of him, for seems like maybe 3 or 4 days, he has become extremely important in their lives. And Mr. Rand is literally thinking that Chance could be, EE's lover and husband after he dies. He's probably visualizing him as like inheriting his business, becoming the chairman of the financial institute, and or whatever the heck it's called, and just stepping in for him. He says he admires his philosophic nature and how stoic he is. And Chance is not afraid to face death, and he's not like all these superficial people. So he genuinely seems to think that he would make a good husband. And then when EE comes back, okay, this is interesting. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about, but we get some fireworks here because she'd been like, this is back in the 70s, so she didn't get on her phone and go scrolling around trying to look for information online, but she's clearly tried to like figure out more about him, because she realizes, I really don't know much about this guy. She'd look through his pockets, tried to find a wallet, tried to find a checking account, anything to kind of like give further identity to this man. And there was nothing in his belongings. So though she snooped, she didn't find anything. But, you would like to think that that would raise alarm bells. And she would think, well, my gosh, like I shouldn't become romantically involved with a man that I actually don't know anything about, who's a total stranger in my home that I actually ran into with my car. But no, she actually comes, it's kind of late at night. She's like calling him up. Can I come to your room? Yeah, sure. So she comes on up, sits beside him on his bed, and he's thinking, this, I've watched this kind of thing before on TV. Usually the man and the woman end up getting closer, and then sometimes they kiss, but then I don't really know what happens after that. But something happens after that, and it's kind of important. And Kosinski writes that he has tried to figure out the connection between this type of activity and the birth of a child, but he never did figure it out and he just kind of forgot about it. So he's in this situation where he's trying to search his mind for, like, what do you do in this situation? And EE is putting her head on his shoulder. Pretty soon she's crying because of her situation and maybe her desperate longing for Mr. Chauncey Gardiner. And pretty soon she is kissing him. Then they like kind of topple over, and pretty soon she's trying to initiate something, but Chance is just laying there. He doesn't know what to do. Nothing's happening. So now what's interesting, in addition to that being, in and of itself, like quite a comedic moment, okay, but also the way that she interprets it. Again, this is the constant theme here, is Chance does something that on its face value would indicate something like, oh, this man is not interested in a romantic relationship or having anything romantic to do with me. But instead, she interprets it as gentlemanly restraint. Okay. In fact, she says, I am grateful to you, Chauncey. You are a man of restraint. You know that with one touch of your hand, just one touch, I would open to you, but you do not wish to exploit another. In some ways, you're not really American. You're more of a European man. Do you know that? What I mean is that unlike most men I've known, you do not practice all those American lover's lane tricks. Okay. And he doesn't know what she's talking about. And she's declaring her love. She says, I might as well tell you this, Chauncey. I am in love with you. I want you. And I know that you want me too. I'm paraphrasing here a bit. But I'm grateful that you decided to wait until Mr. Rand passes. She doesn't say that, but that's what she means. And then she gets up and goes away, and he just kind of snaps back to normal. He's like, oh, that didn't really happen. All right, on to the next thing. So overall, this is a pivotal part of the story. We see that people are incapable of seeing and experiencing what is right in front of them and insist on making up their own narrative when they are faced with somebody who's handsome and well-spoken and dressed well and connected to wealthy people, seemingly, who acts as though nothing is wrong, going with the flow. It comes across as super confident. And so he's incredibly charismatic. And why? Because he is an empty signifier of sorts. The thoughts and feelings of people, their desires, their hopes, their wishes, whether it's for a healthy economy or a romantic relationship or, financial leadership or whatever the heck it is that they want, all gets projected into that emptiness. And then that's what they see. And this is the magnetic personality trait of some leaders, right? It is not them. It's us. It's not them. It's us. And when a figure becomes incredibly magnetic, when it's a personality that looms large, larger than life, larger than reason, that's the phenomenon, is the projection of all of your anxiety, hopes, dreams, fears, longings for perfection, for solace, whatever it is, you project it there, and that's what you see. So Kosinski is tapping into a fundamental political phenomenon. He's talking about how it can be used to justify and perpetuate, in this case, economic and political systems that are harmful to people, and how visual media in particular helps accentuate our superficiality and our tendency to project onto others, onto the mana personality, let's say, our own longings.